Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Rush Deep Dive. Today, we're deep diving into 1981's Moving Pictures that just celebrated, well, its 40th birthday a year ago, but we just got the 40th anniversary Moving Pictures. So, as we do, I'm going to read briefly from Hugh Syme's Art of Rush about the cover art of Moving Pictures, and then we'll briefly discuss. I've always embraced the imagery and wit in Neil's titles, says Hugh. As a band, they always come up with provocative and wonderful titles. Rush has rarely failed me in providing the genesis for a strong idea. I approached the band with the cover pun, then the idea of the back cover, and finally, the stroboscopic motion trails for the band photos on the inner sleeve. Once Hugh and I found our stride and trust level, immediately the puns started to come up, says Neil. Moving Pictures is nothing but pun on pun on pun. They have to be a little subtle like that because the design and the image have to come first, more than the joke. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I try to explain to her that jokes are only funny once, not 12 times. So that's the problem when you're making something. It has to be wry like Moving Pictures is. How did Hugh Syme combine the title's 3 simultaneous meanings in a single album sleeve illustration? Picture this. In the heart of a metropolis, an art museum has closed its doors. Even the gargoyles gazing out from the gallery's impressive stonework seem somber. Below them, 5 burly men in red overalls move 3 pictures out of the gallery. They look like a line of worker ants. The first 2 movers appear to struggle with the sheer weight of a framed picture of Joan of Arc. Behind them, 2 other men use gloves to carry the C.M. Coolidge painting, A Friend in Need. Bringing up the rear, a lone worker hoists the world-renowned masterpiece, The Starman, down the museum steps. Several passersby in winter coats stop to gawp. A young girl stares at the Coolidge painting, in which a group of dogs sit at a table playing poker. Like so many art critics before her, the girl responds by opening her mouth in a frozen scream, an Edvard Munch painting come to life. Her younger sister turns toward her, eyes wide. Their father bends down and places reassuring hands on his children's shoulders. Nearby, a middle-aged woman standing near the museum entrance takes an unusual interest in the Starman. She drops her grocery bag full of fresh fruit. Her husband, standing tall with an ushanka on his head, tries to console his wife as she dabs her eyes with a handkerchief. The picture has moved her to tears. Apples and oranges tumble down the museum steps. On the back of the album sleeve, we see the same art museum from afar. This time there's a twist. The 5 movers in red overalls rest near the steps, their pictures propped up on the rain-sodden concrete. The middle-aged woman and her husband saunter nearby. Despite the chill in the overcast air, they seem relaxed. Around them, there's a bustle of activity. In a grand reveal, we see that the dozens of people in hooded parkas and scarves are huddled around an echelon of huge lighting stands, movie cameras on tripods, boom microphones, and folding canvas chairs. Some engage in conversation, others stand idle. One man sits atop a large truck parked nearby. It's the set of a moving picture. It's not just the picture that gives the album cover its imposing power, it's also the formidable black frame around it and the band's name in eye-catching red. Hugh deliberately spaced out the letters of the title in a manner similar to the aesthetic of Francis Ford Coppola's Zoetrope Studios. Decades later, Moving Pictures remains Rush's most recognized album, a landmark according to its creators. It's remarkable in retrospect what this album came to signify, something that you could never know at the time, says Neil. The cover stands up so well. There was a strongly whimsical approach to this, yet it's presented in a very formal, classic way. Those qualities garnered Hugh and Deborah Samuel, one of the artists, a Juno, Canada's prestigious music award for Best Album Graphics in 1982. Getty says that Moving Pictures was a big evolution for the band. We were finally, as a band, able to do what we'd been trying to do the 3 albums previous. We had greater abilities. It all came together on that one album, and Hugh Syme also made a huge leap forward with the artwork. I think it's one of the best. I don't think it is the best. I will say that, but it is one of the best Hugh Syme pieces. I think the nod that they paid to their hometown with this being the Toronto legislative building is awesome, and I think the puns with or the three meanings, moving pictures, as mentioned, I just think it's awesome. What do you guys think?
Well, that's a must. If you're in Toronto, like I was, you've got to get your picture taken in front of there. That's Rush's Abbey Road. You just have to. I've actually got a homemade moving pictures CD with a picture in it of the black and the border around it, and there's me standing in front of those iconic pillars. I just looked back at that and I thought, this is so cool. Yeah, it's their Abbey Road. I mean, you cannot, if you're a Rush fan, you got to do it. You have to at least go and look at it. It's quite the sight. And you just stand there and you look at it and you go, this is it. Like, it didn't change. Those are the pillars.
It's funny, when I saw it, the first thing that I thought of was the 1980 movie Airplane, okay, which is still a funny movie. And there's a scene in there where it shows some photographers with like really old style cameras, and they go, okay, boys, let's get some pictures. And they start taking the pictures off the wall. And so it's a very old vaudeville pun, okay? And it's hilarious when it's done right. And I thought it was very cleverly done on that cover. And I said to myself, this came out in 81. I wonder if it was in some way an homage to Airplane.
It would surprise me.
Because we love that kind of stuff.
Hugh works really well in two different kinds of art. One, tableaus, which this is one of his most famous tableaus. Roll the Bones, I think, is another enormously successful tableau design. And then he also works very figuratively as well. And you can see the cover of Vapor Trails, for example, is much more surreal and not specific. And this was at a period of time with moving pictures, at a period of time where he did quite a few tableaus that featured just all kinds of references. I mean, the cover for Exit Stage Left, which is the live album that followed this album, is another one that's got the whimsical Rush sense of humor in there, plus all kinds of interesting Easter eggs. And that was the joy of getting LPs back in the days. You get this 12 by 12 inch cover and sit there and listen to the album while going over the album artwork and picking out all of the different references and Easter eggs. And that's
and the liner notes. I miss vinyl records. Seriously, the liner notes.
And I hope physical media continues to make a kind of comeback along those lines, so we can see more of this artwork. And Hugh Syme's still actively working, so we may be treated to large format Hugh Syme artwork again. That'd be great. Obviously not in Rush's context, but other bands.
So this is Deborah Samuel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who took the photos, right? For the covers, I believe.
Yeah.
And another thing, this photo here, a friend in need, the dogs playing poker. Apparently, the story has it that Neil really loved that photo and had to have it on there as one of the photos, pictures being moved. So I just think it's a brilliant cover, and Tim, you make a great point. It is Rush's Abbey Road. It's that polarizing. All right, well, let's talk about the music, shall we? So Bob is going to go first. We're going to go, this is Rush Deep Dive, right? And Moving Pictures being the popular album. We only have 7 choices too. We always try to pick deeper cuts. So we did our best to pick the 4 deepest cuts, right? Yeah. So Bob is
on an album where everything is a great cut.
Exactly. Yeah. We tried to pick the 4 least popular, I guess, if you could say. So Bob is going to start with the only song from side 1 that we're going to be talking about, and that's Red Barchetta.
Yeah, well, one of the least popular happens to be one of my all-time favorite Rush songs, right? And just to give you a taste, because I'm new to this show, just to give you a sense of my taste in Rush music, Red Barchetta usually battles top billing among favorites like Between the Wheels, Analog Kid, The Pass, The Garden, Time Stand Still, Marathon. I'm a real 80s Rush kind of guy. Moving Pictures all the way through Presto. There's very few duds in that group of songs and group of albums. And this is maybe my favorite. It's hard to pick a favorite because the matter of degrees between each song, as far as it's very narrow, right? So you're going to get a whole bunch of favorites all gathered together vying for the top spot. And that's kind of where I am with this song. But whenever someone asks, what's your favorite Rush song? This is the one that I instinctively snap to. The song really serves as kind of a connective tissue between some of the dystopian future stories of Rush in the 70s, but this time with a more precise and a brief way of telling that story, a shorter song, a more accessible song. I could also see it as the first movement of a longer story. If they had chosen at that point to expand it into a 10-minute piece or a 12-minute piece, this could have been the first movement of a broader scene, right? But it's fine just the way it is. In 2112, the protagonist's MacGuffin is a guitar that changes his life. And in Red Barchetta, the MacGuffin is a car, but both songs aren't about the MacGuffins. This is what I was mentioning earlier before we started the show. I said it's a song about a car, but it's actually kind of more than that. It's a song about a car, but it's actually kind of a song about youthful freedom and liberation more than it is the car. The car is just the conveyance to get us to that sense of freedom, that sense of youth, and the sense of escape from some sort of oppression, some sort of future dystopia. And then further connecting it to the songs of the 70s, the Rush longer songs of the 70s, there's even a teeny tiny musical reference to both 2112 and Hemispheres, with Alex's use of guitar harmonics during the intro and the outro for Red Barchetta. And for those of you who don't play guitar, harmonics are created when you kind of gently touch your finger to a string over the metal fret as you pick, rather than pressing the string down onto the fretboard. And it creates kind of this gentle, high-pitched pinging sound. I heard an orchestra once perform this song, and they used the harp to play the harmonic parts at the beginning of Red Barchetta. Interesting take on that. But guitarists often use harmonics to tune their instruments, hence the link to what I consider to be a musical link to the discovery movement of 2112, where the main character first finds the guitar and he's tuning it up and he's playing harmonics in that. Alex is playing the harmonics. And I also... as I also mentioned, Red Barchetta has a similar feel as some of the first 5 minutes of Hemispheres. And in fact, if you go to the point in Hemispheres about 2 minutes in, it's almost exactly 2 minutes into Hemispheres, we hear the appearance of, once again, Alex's use of harmonics with a harmonic riff that's nearly identical to Red Barchetta's intro. So that you can see the ancestry of Red Barchetta in its music and the callbacks to some of the catalog of songs that Rush had just done in the previous decade. But this, with the new decade into the 80s, this is the new version of that, right? And as we all know, the lyrics were inspired by Richard Foster's short story, A Nice Morning Drive in Road and Track, starring a guy named Buzz. The main character's name is Buzz, which I always found interesting, and set during a time in the future when vehicles are designed to be gigantic and therefore impenetrably safe, right? Kind of the early concept for SUVs, but called modern safety vehicles in the short story. And Neil changed some of the elements. I think alloy air cars are his version of Foster's MSVs. And I always imagine a gigantic DeLorean whenever I hear the song and I hear the air car, gleaming alloy air car. I don't know why I go to DeLorean. I guess it's like an 80s thing. It's an 80s car, but in a sort of a view of the future kind of sense. And ethical as always, of course, Neil tried to contact Foster to get his permission to base the song off of the guy's short story, but they weren't able to link up before the album pressing. So they went with an inspired by credit in the liner notes. Richard Foster once told the story of actually discovering that Red Barchetta existed. It's kind of an interesting little teeny tiny story. And he only found it many years later. He said here, we had just gotten internet access. So this tells you maybe 10 years later, we had just gotten internet access in my office. And one of the guys entered my name into a search engine just for fun. It promptly took him to a Rush fan site where there was an online copy of my story. We figured out the connection between A Nice Morning Drive and Red Barchetta and marveled at how many years we had failed to discover it. And then he said parenthetically, I had heard the song on the radio, but I hadn't focused on its lyrics fully enough to make the connection. And of course, if that had happened these days, they'd probably sue or something.
Yeah.
How dare you? Yeah. We also know that Getty mispronounces Barchetta, which is actually pronounced Barchetta. Literally translated, it means small boat. Essentially, a small sports car without a roof qualifies as a Barchetta. But of course, Getty totally owned the mispronunciation, and now we all mispronounce it. And as noted in Martin Popoff's book, Rush in the 80s, Alex said that the intention was, quote, to create a song that was very vivid so that you had a sense, if you listen to it and listen to the lyrics of the action, it does become a movie. In fact, Popoff noted that Getty's idea for each song on the record was to be a short film. Tom Sawyer, short film. Red Barchetta, short film, etc. And this is an interesting observation I've had for many years now. It's one of only a couple shorter length Rush songs that don't have a lyrical chorus or a repeated lyrical refrain in there. I went through my entire library of Rush songs, and just at a glance, the following long form songs don't have choruses. Bytor and the Snow Dog, no chorus. The Necromancer, as far as I could tell, no chorus in that, and Cygnus X1. But in terms of the shorter tracks, I think it's limited to Red Barchetta, Witch Hunt, and Countdown. Those three songs also do not have choruses, or including Red Barchetta, don't have choruses. During a Making of Moving Pictures documentary, Getty, it's a funny scene. You can actually look this up on YouTube. Getty explained, quote, the choruses are supposed to, well, I don't know what to call the choruses of this song, frankly. In typical Rush fashion, there is no real chorus. There is no real bridge, all just parts, and they have their own kind of personality. There are musical refrains, but no lyrical refrain. And I think the music refrain is the and that we return to that, but there's no lyric over that would have normally been the chorus. That's kind of a nerdy bit of observation. Let's see what else. One last thing here. It's one of only a handful of Rush songs that fades into the instrumentation at the very beginning. The other fade-ins are Heresy from Roll the Bones, fading into Neil's snare cadence. Take a Friend from the first album, which also fades into the full band, and The Weapon from Signals also fades into Neil. And one more thing. There's a 1981 movie starring Lee Majors and Burgess Meredith called The Last Chase, which also happens to have been inspired by Foster's short story. So there's a connection. There's a degree of 2 degree separation between Rush and Lee Majors and Burgess Meredith and this movie, which is evidently pretty bad, The Last Chase. So there you go. There's my Rush deep dive. I have some personal observations, but if you have any questions or further comments about Red Barchetta, I can mention those as we go.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head, hit the nail right on the head when you said about the songs being movies. Like you can, Rush just put out the visual videos on YouTube for every single one of these. They took Hugh Symes' artwork and put them to a visual.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, part of that quote that you read, Bob, of Alex in Popoff's book, to add to it, he says, it's something that I think we've tried to carry on, become a little more visual with our music. Yeah. And you can definitely see that obviously in this song, but I'm going to talk about that too when I talk about the camera eye next. But I think, I totally think that that was intentional.
We also see Neil evolving as a writer. Okay.
Yes,
right.
I mean, let's be honest. The guys haven't been together that long. I mean, okay, in rock and roll terms, they've been together forever because rock bands are perpetually changing personnel. But I mean, the original band with Neil was really 1974, 75 before they started producing really new music.
Right.
This is only like 6 years.
6 years.
Yeah. And they've gone from really bizarre, kind of out there epics, which they will go back to at some point and then have to be reined in again. And now they're trying to do a little mass appeal. And nobody told them to do it. Nobody said, you must be mass appeal. But it just sort of fell that way. There were certain things that came together. And I think if I were on my desert island and I wanted to introduce people to Rush, this is one of the more accessible Rush albums. It does all the things that we fans love, but for a newbie, there's songs on here that you could go, okay, yeah, that song. Yeah, okay, that one. And so I'm thinking in that way.
And it's also lyrically one of those songs where Neil struggles with the concept of change. Obviously, in Tom Sawyer, changes aren't permanent, but changes. The more the things change, the more they stay the same. It's something that Neil comes back to and grapples with.
And Limelight.
Yeah. Oh, Limelight, absolutely. But in this song, it's change in terms of technology, leaving behind something that was very romantic and sexy and youthful. In lieu of these giant, completely safe, completely sterile vehicles that can't even get across a bridge. Yep. And so, yeah, it's kind of Neil working through how he feels about the concept of, things being replaced, change affecting pop culture and society and so on. And it's a fascinating view of that. And I don't know exactly where he lands on it. It seems like he's lamenting the idea of the loss of that romanticism.
But also the industry is changing.
Yeah,
you're starting to, I mean, like them or not, CNN makes its debut around this period of time, 1980. Okay, MTV, back when they played music, makes their debut, 1981. You're starting to see new ways of receiving music. AM used to rule, now it's FM. Pretty soon everybody's doing compact discs, then, et cetera, et cetera. And how does the artist cope with all these changes?
Yeah. Well, that's just it. And Tom Sawyer, he's kind of coming to terms with it. He kind of is settling on the idea that he's just accepting the idea that change is happening and we just have to deal with it. But in this particular song, it's more about, well, we can't forget where we came from and what the fun things were that we're losing. And with the changeover from the 70s into the 80s, that was writ large, just to pivot off of what you were saying, Donna, going from the 70s to the 80s, where the music industry was very organic and driven by creativity. And in the 80s, it became much more commercialized and business oriented. And it was the same with radio.
That kind of leads into the song Ryan's going to talk about. In fact, this whole album kind of leads into addressing change, dealing with change, the good from the past, the bad from the past. Ryan?
What a segue. I'm talking about side two, we're going to start talking about side two here. I'm going to talk about the first song from side two, that is The Camera Eye. And I feel like Red Barchetta, Bob, you said about Red Barchetta, your comparison of that to 2112. Red Barchetta is like, it almost serves as an epic, just crammed into 6 minutes, right? Exactly. And then you have the actual epic, 10 minutes plus of The Camera Eye. And I just feel like the side starts off with the 10-minute epic, right? And the forgotten about side of Moving Pictures, or the 3 non-radio hits side, or whatever you want to call it. So the title, The Camera Eye, taking from John Dos Passos's The Camera Eye. And I feel like this song captures, kind of the feeling someone can have when they're in New York or in London, and kind of contradicting cities, I guess, in a way, and we'll get into that lyrically momentarily. But any town for that matter. This song could describe any city really, but it talks about New York and London, and how every city has qualities and characteristics that kind of make them their own, right? The song opens. It's about 1 minute and 30 seconds of kind of a synth-focused jam. And then Alex and Neil really come in, guitar and drums respectively. That opening 3 minutes is really a tone setter for what is to come. Then you get into kind of the main guitar riff. It's very driving, and similar to like the quote that I read from Alex that I piggybacked on the quote that you read, Bob. The music in this song provides the listener a visual. It's not just the lyrics. It's the music is providing you that you can stand, and I've done this myself, you can stand in New York City and put this song on, and you just feel so immersed in that environment, in that atmosphere of New York City with the way this music is set. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. So when it comes to Neil, because this is a very quintessential Neil album, Neil says in Modern Drummer, a good example of the principle of editing is the pair of long fills that introduce each vocal section in the second half of the camera eye. I wanted something really special and exciting there, but I didn't want it to be organized and prearranged. The only way to capture that spirit of wild abandon is to be that way. Every time we did a take of the song, I would close my eyes to those sections, let it go and flail away. This ranged from ridiculous to the sublime, but I was able to choose the most successful, exciting fills for this finished track. What it really boils down to is that it's always you playing. Editing just gives you the opportunity to choose the very best you can do. So lyrically, I think you can divide the song into two sections. The Rush website has it called 1, 2. Most people call it the New York section and the London section. And I think I think the New York section, it's kind of intense and kind of vital, and the London section's kind of calm. And it kind of tells you a travel journey story here. So one of my all-time favorite lyrics: grim-faced and forbidding, their faces closed tight, an angular mass of New Yorkers. Pacing in rhythm, race the oncoming night, they chase through the streets of Manhattan. Head first humanity, pause at a light, then flow through the streets of the city. That puts you in New York City. It's perfect. It's so impressive. And I think I was actually at the Time Machine Tour show at Madison Square Garden in 2011 when they played this song. It was the first time. It was a big deal when they brought the camera eye back, because there was never any live recorded material of this up until just very recently with the 1981 version. That's why it was a huge deal. But hearing this song live in Madison Square Garden, I mean, chills. The crowd went absolutely bonkers when Geddy sang "An Angular Mass of New Yorkers" and chased through the streets of Manhattan. Chills every time. And I just think it does a fantastic job painting that picture for the listener as to the characteristics of New York City and what life is all about there. Because the next part, they seem oblivious to a soft spring rain. I think everything, like an English rain, so light yet endless from a leaden sky. Sorry, had to do that. But I think that right there is as I make a fool of myself. No, I think that part right there, they seem oblivious to a soft spring rain, right? Everything that's going around, everything that is happening around you while you're in New York City, you could be oblivious to the fact that it's raining because there's so much stuff going on there. I think that's what's kind of being said there. But and then the next part, the buildings are lost in their limitless rise. I actually think buildings is a metaphor for humans in this verse, because buildings getting lost in the city skyline. It's people living in New York City or just tourists just feeling like ants, basically, more or less. You can feel overwhelmed in New York City. I mean, I've been there. My wife felt sick to her stomach when I went with her because she just felt so, everything around her is just, it's so moving, and not to take a pun on the title, but you just feel so small. And then the London section, wide angle watcher on life's ancient tales, steeped in the history of London, green and gray washes in the wispy white veil, mist in the streets of Westminster. Wistful and weathered, the pride still prevails, alive in the streets of the city. I mean, it's just, and then the next part, pavements may teem with intense energy, but the city is calm in this violent sea. Just again, the imagery being painted. I've never been to London, but I feel like I have been because I've listened to this section of this song, and I think Neil's lyrics with the way the band, and I've said this 100 times on prior Rush deep dives, because we're going in a reverse order. You see kind of where the band went with their storytelling over time, but I mean, this is really, it's impressive. And the quote that I read from Hugh Syme's book, where they really felt that this album was where they wanted to go from the prior 3 albums, so Permanent Waves, Hemispheres, and A Farewell to Kings. They feel like they really perfected it all in this. So is the camera eye like their perfect vision of an epic based on that quote? I mean, I mean, Natural Science is a fantastic song, and the Cygnus Stories and 2112 and all that, but does Rush maybe think that the camera eye is their perfect vision of their epic track? I don't know. It's just a question to pose. But and 2 more things I want to mention before I turn it over to you all. At 8:56 into the song, in the background, some people say it's Getty burping and saying, "Oh God." Most Rush fans think it's an English greeting, something to the extent of "Hello, morning, Gov." And there's also a possibility of it's Getty saying more dub, like being in the studio requesting, a monitor adjustment in his headphones. But yes, as I mentioned prior, this was the #1 fan requested song for Rush to perform live, because they stopped playing it in 1983, brought it back in 2010 on their Time Machine tour, playing Moving Pictures from top to bottom, and people were overjoyed, myself included. Fantastic track, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
One of the things I love about Camera Eye is it's an epic track. It's what would you say, 10 minutes long? But the sounds used, the structure of it sounds like a shorter song.
It doesn't feel like 10 minutes, right?
Exactly. It has a completely different feel from Natural Science from the previous album, where Natural Science did really feel like 70s epic Rush. Camera Eye takes that length, but treats it in a way that the sound and the vibe of it sound more like something that you would hear on Signals or Grace Under Pressure even.
Sure.
So it's kind of forward thinking and reverse thinking at the same time. I have no idea if that was the intention or not, right, but it combines that. And I think that's, I could also say that, in fact, I think I did say that about Red Barchetta, where it does have that mindfulness of what came before while striving for something new in the future, or in the present into the future.
And of course, in Limelight, it talks about living in a fisheye lens, caught in the camera's eye. I mean,
yeah.
Neil is playing with the fact that we're performers. We're all on the stage of life. And whether we want to or not, we're all playing a part. We're all playing our roles. And people are, in fact, taking pictures, mental pictures of us. They're making impressions. You're doing it right now. You're watching this at home and you're like, oh my God, will she ever shut up? Or, oh my God, that's the most brilliant thing I ever heard, or whatever. But people are just constantly snapping their little picture and then taking that with them the next time. And Neil is living with this fame that he both wanted and kind of didn't want, because you lose your anonymity. So who are you when you're performing? Who are you when you're in that lens? So it's a very interesting metaphor.
And, I always think too, when I hear the London section, I think of it almost as a bookend for Neil, and the other bookend being his time in London when he was being
That's
Chef
right, yeah.
Elwood,
Yes.
Yep.
when his wife was sick after his daughter had died,
Yes.
and spending that time in England. And whether he may have thought back to his original concepts of whether he went when he went to England to perform there as a kid before joining Rush, or what he wrote about London in that song. I can't help but to go to the connection between those events in his life.
It's a really good point. That's a fantastic point. I think we have to mention the guitar solo too in this song. It's brilliant. And you made me think of something, Bob. I don't know if this was the intention with the title of the album, Moving Pictures, but it almost is like the title of this album and the content of these songs with how much imagery is in them. It's almost like a gateway into what is to come in their career. Like, it's almost like, I know this album isn't the midway point in their career, but it kind of is. It's a shift towards, but it's a shift towards visual storytelling in their song. I mean, I know they kind of did it with their epics and such, but they really start to do it with, look at Hold Your Fire, for example. I mean, that there's a lot of visuals, a lot of storytelling in that, but it almost feels like it's kind of a portal to that next stage of their career too. And the title is a pun on that in a way.
Yeah. And in a sense, that was kind of the pace that the band was going at: 4 studio albums, then a live album. And then the live album would sort of wrap up a particular era, insofar as they considered that to be an era. So you had this group of 4 albums culminating in Moving Pictures, and then followed by Exit Stage Left. And then you get to Signals, which is, oh my God, we're into an entirely new, I mean, they basically reinvented themselves for Signals. Obviously, they're still Rush, but it's an entirely new era. So in a sense, Moving Pictures, not only, again, looking back, also looking forward, and in that sense, wrapping up a mini journey for the band musically.
100%. Let's talk about part 3 of Fear, Witch Hunt. Donna?
Yeah. And we've talked, since we've been moving backwards, we've talked about some of the other songs in the so-called Fear trilogy, which actually became a quadrilogy or something, or whatever you call it when it's 4 of them. But of course, you have Witch Hunt from 81. You got The Weapon from Signals from 82. You got The Enemy Within from Grace Under Pressure, 84. And then we wait a while, and in 2002, you got Freeze from Vapor Trails, which is part of the series of songs about fear as well. When I teach literature, which I've been doing for years, I mean, even when I was a rock and roll DJ, I still would teach a course now and then. And when I teach literature, I always tell my students, look at what was going on at the time. Because just about nobody creates art for no particular reason, just like wake up on a Tuesday and say, hey, I think I'll create some art. Very often you're influenced by what's going on in your culture or in your world. And what was going on in the world when Neil wrote Witch Hunt? Well, let's see. In about 1980 or so, the late 80s, you got Ronald Reagan getting elected. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Uh-oh, here comes politics. Nope, not where I'm going at all. Where I am going, though, is the confluence of religion and politics, because Reagan gets elected because of the rise of the so-called moral majority, a group of evangelical Christians who believe that separation of church and state, not for them. They believe that they should get involved in politics, and they become a major political force, teaching and preaching about conservative family values, wanting school prayer back in the schools, but only Christian prayer, and wanting to evangelize, and using the power of politics to get their ends. As an artist and as someone who is a skeptic, this makes Neil nervous because even though it's happening in the States, it could be happening anywhere because we have had periods of time when religion and politics mixed, and it was never a good thing. It always ended up with one group of people being discriminated against and another group of people trying to take dominion over them. What else is going on besides the rise of the moral majority in late 1980? Well, you got John Lennon getting murdered, December 8th of 1980. I remember where I was when that happened. A lot of us boomers remember where we were when that happened. And again, as a young artist, you're sitting there and you're going, wow, I mean, John Lennon was a really influential person. And now all of a sudden, dead? And then a few months later, Reagan gets shot at, and Reagan almost gets killed. And his press secretary, Jim Brady, ends up with just like grave wounds that he keeps with him for the rest of his life. He ends up in a wheelchair. So, I mean, there's all of this violence, and you start getting this new disease that at that time is sweeping the gay community, but it will soon sweep other communities as well. In June of 81, it's identified as AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And everything is unsettled. Donna, what's your point? At times like that, that's very often when people want answers and they want a magical solution. And that's when we start, when society is feeling ill at ease, when they're seeing, inflation, or when they're seeing a rise in immigrants or different people coming to the country who don't look like us. Suddenly, you start getting a group of people rising and trying to blame someone, okay? And we saw this with the Salem witch trials way back in the 1600s, 1690s, but it had been sweeping all over Europe before then, promoted by a group of people who didn't understand certain phenomena that today we understand because of science. Miscarriages, animals dying, droughts, blizzards, these things, there was no way to explain them back then. So it was like, aha, witches. And during the Salem witch trials, like 200 people got accused of being witches. I mean, it was a lot of people. And not only did they get accused, but like 30 of them are found guilty. 19 of them are executed, both men and women, because, hey, come on, And Neil is watching the modern day versions of this in country after country. Okay. And just like in The Weapon, which opens with, we've got nothing to fear but fear itself. And the things that we fear are a weapon to be held against us. This is where Neil is going. The night is black without a moon. The air is thick and still. The vigilantes gather on the lonely torchlit hill, Charlottesville, carrying them torches, looking for a group of people to blame. Features distorted in the flickering light. Faces are twisted and grotesque. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. We have seen this in city after city, says Neil, in time after time. All it takes is a demagogue or a person with an agenda who's a good speaker, who's able to stir people up and tell them that it's them that are to blame for your problems. Yeats wrote about this. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. That's what we got here. We got passionate intensity. The righteous rise with burning eyes, but they're not righteous, are they? They've given up their righteousness. They've given up their ethics for power. Madmen fed on fear and lies to beat and burn and kill. And at the end, you've got quick to anger, quick to judge, quick to anger, slow to understand, ignorance and prejudice and fear walk hand in hand. There is a wonderful episode from 1960 of The Twilight Zone. I've mentioned it before. Rod Serling, you can see it on YouTube, called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. It's about how a simple event that people couldn't understand leads some people to say, well, hey, those people are obviously spies. And pretty soon people are trying to like egg their house, and then they want them driven out. And the whole thing is just overblown and stirred up. And at the end, Martians are sitting there going, wow, it's really easy to just kind of turn these people against each other. All you need is a rumor and somebody to spread it. And as I said, that song could have been written yesterday.
Right.
You have people running around this country terrified of them, and craven politicians all over the world using that fear to get elected, to stay in power, while the innocent are persecuted and the guilty think they'll just walk away from it. And Neil is warning us, don't give up your ethics. Don't give up your critical thinking. Don't join the mob. You think that torch is going to light your way? It's not going to light your way at all.
Very well said.
Yeah.
A couple things that I wanted to add. Three things, I guess, actually. First, the beginning, the screaming and the the yelling and the ranting and the raving, that was done at Les Studio in Quebec.
Yes.
Real
group of people. They encourage them to do that. Yes.
Yeah, they got really drunk, and the loudest one there you can hear is actually Neil. And of course it got louder the drunker they got.
But the bells at the beginning, the little, it starts off seeming like it's going to be something else. Right. And I think that's Neil's way of saying every hate movement always starts off seeming like it's going to be something else, seeming like it's just going to be this gentle, peaceful thing.
Good point.
And then it gets worse and worse and worse if you give up your critical thinking.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The next thing I wanted to mention was the quick to judge, quick to anger, slow to understand lyric. I think that so applies regardless of what side you're on, right? Both sides do it. I see it all the time, all over the internet.
Absolutely.
And it's so applicable to literally, like you said, today. And the last thing I wanted to mention, any of you see the Time Machine tour and this song, Moving Pictures, played in its entirety in this song? My jaw was on the ground when Alex came out at the beginning of this song and played those opening guitar notes. It was so loud, and it was so, you were so immersed in that sound, and I was so impressed. I wasn't too familiar with this song at that time, and once just blew me away, fantastic. Fantastic.
Keep coming back to the things that we fear are a weapon to be held against us. Whether you fear gay people, whether you fear lefties or righties or people from the North or people from the South, there are people trying to stir you up and keep you outraged. And the more they are 100%. Able to do that, the less you are able to think for yourself, Neil says. Ignorance and prejudice and fear walk hand in hand.
It's one of several songs where Neil and the band entirely are angry or discontented. I think it stands out on Moving Pictures especially, but then you move forward in time and even something like BU2B is pretty angry, or Stick It Out. Stick It Out's a pretty angry song too.
But not angry in a preachy way. They're not yelling at you. They're just saying,
it's just determination. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. Grabbing people by the lapels and say, listen to this. This is important. Yes.
Yeah.
Tim, let's deviate from the norm. You are up, sir.
Vital Signs. Okay, this is going to sound funny, but Vital Signs is actually only the second song from Moving Pictures I ever heard. When I first started getting into the band, watching Much Music, Canada's MTV, seeing the videos they would play, of course, I would see the Tom Sawyer video, did not see the Limelight video till much, much later. So it just happens that they happened to play the video for Vital Signs, and I happened to catch it on one of my VHS tapes. Did not realize it was shot at the same place, shot in the studio, because it's very dark. It's got a very, very different feel to it. And the song has a very different feel to it. Neil, in an interview when Moving Picture celebrated its 30th anniversary, said that when they were in the studio, very often they would make up fake bands for themselves to help them to go in other areas. So they would have like a sort of a punk band, and they'd call it Rockin' F. And then they had a new wave band, which they called the Fabulous Men. And he said Vital Signs was definitely the Fabulous Men. You hear an awful lot of Police. On our
Tim,
last,
I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm going to interrupt you because I was going to state this later. It's actually on the bottom of this too, and I'll put an actual graphic on edited in.
Fabulous,
it says the Fabulous Men at the bottom, written by the Fabulous Men.
Apparently that's carved. That was carved in a rock somewhere in Morin Heights, where the studio compound was. So yeah, there's a lot of Police in there, just like we talked about in the Signals episode with Digital Man. There's a lot of that Andy Summers type of guitar, but it's such a strange, they're playing with the time. Alex will go from dun 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 dun, like he'll start the one of the guitar riff will be in a different spot every time. You just kind of get this, it feels very mechanical, and that's what the lyrics are all about. And I love the play on words. Neil's good at that. Like pause, rewind, replay, warm memory chip, and then the memory chip, random sample, hold the one you need. The lyrics are just fantastic. Weave out the fiction. The fact is, this friction will only be worn by persistence. Now, that's a mouthful for me to say, but Geddy sings it effortlessly. And that's another thing about this album. Geddy really took this idea of having mini movies seriously. He becomes the character in each of the songs. In Red Barchetta, laughing out loud with fear and hope, you can almost picture him like, this is, I got a desperate plan. It almost reminds me of Detroit Rock City by Kiss. Like, I got to laugh because I know I'm going to die. But yeah, Vital Signs is just so, again, indicating, the future that they would go in. Vital Signs is almost like, hey, glad you liked this album. Thanks for listening. Here's a little preview of what's to come.
Yeah.
And I love the unique, I don't know how they did it. It was a special way that they recorded the drums. It sounds like Neil's hitting felt in the verses when he hits the snare. Like it's hardly anything, but it's just right. And then towards the end, of course, when the band is full on jamming, it's typical Rush. But even then, it goes back. It fades out, kind of, back to that sort of outer worldly thing. I think it's just a perfect marriage of the lyrics and music. And again, yeah, it's the three guys playing it, but they really, really hit upon this idea of machines. And I love the synth in the middle part. It's so ethereal. And Geddy's bass tone is so, like it's, I mean, it's just a perfect sounding album, right? This is just one song of 7 perfect sounding songs. But as a way to close out the album, it's a perfect, because it fades out and you're left just there thinking about it. And I can imagine in 1981, someone hearing all these songs for the first time going, what just happened? I gotta put that on again. So yeah, Vital Signs, great way to end the album. A highlight on an album full of them. There's a reason this album has now been certified 5 times platinum. Just last year, it hit the 5 million mark. I love that. To me, all the snobs, the music snobs that dismiss Rush is like, have you got a 5 times platinum album? I don't think so. Rush do. And they got a lot of platinums and golds too. But yeah, it's just, yeah, I didn't know how I was going to talk about this song. I guess I just did. But yeah, Vital Signs.
The thematically, it almost makes the album come full circle too, especially with the pause, rewind, replay line, which moving pictures, it's a thematic kind of full circle moment. But
and again, at this point, VCR, well, beta, the idea of video cassette recorders were just entering into people's consciousness as far as being able to. I remember the first time, you can watch a movie again and again and again, and there's no commercials.
Yep.
And
music videos.
Exactly.
Bands that had never thought about having a video suddenly had to go get the first music videos, as I'm sure you remember, were just like person with guitar, lip syncing badly. But pretty soon you're starting to get like little movies, and there it is.
Moving pictures.
Yeah.
It's also interesting because we're talking about three white guys from Toronto going full reggae. I mean, it's Rush's version of reggae, and we did a brief reference to it in Spirit of Radio, but this is also the first full song that really exemplifies Rush's interest in the Police at that point in time. And we really hear the Police in Signals. That's where it really comes to the forefront. So you begin the 70s with a heavy Led Zeppelin influence, and then 10 years later, it's a pretty heavy Police influence. And I'm not saying they were derivative by any sense. We're all the product of what we observe, but you can really hear it in Vital Signs, of course, and then
but just like Neil's a reader, the guys in the band love all kinds of music. And we could go on forever talking about this, but if we missed something, put it in the comments. Okay, if there's like a comment that you have about a song that we didn't get to, like we talked about 4 of them, but it's a great album, come on. And if there's other stuff that you think we should have paid attention to, please put it in the comments. We respond to the comments. We'd be happy to hear from you.
Absolutely. Closing thoughts on Moving Pictures?
I love that album. It's one of my favorites. And for me, it was really a very mass appeal way to get some people into Rush who weren't into Rush. Okay. And so I think it's a very, I know there are some people that are just like, oh my God, Limelight. But at the time, Limelight wasn't being played 6,000 times. You weren't like horribly sick of Tom Sawyer. You weren't like, oh my God, if I ever hear Spirit of Radio again, just naming Rush songs that got a lot of airplay. At the time, Rush weren't getting a lot of airplay. And this was kind of a vehicle to get them some more airplay. So that worked out very nicely.
I've called this my favorite Rush album, and I know it's their most successful album, but I still think it's the album that distills what they do best into a single album, where you don't have to say, go listen to Chronicles or go listen to one of the Gold albums or one of the live albums. I don't think they've ever bettered it. And I know most people watching this probably have it by now, but the 40th anniversary edition is worth getting simply for the concert alone. It is so surreal to hear Geddy introducing songs like Limelight, where in a very, very short time, all they need to do is hear one note and everybody knows what song it is. They were on fire. And I love the reggae version of Working Man. Love it. A little bit of that.
It's their musical peak, I mean, this Neil stated in an interview, I think it was the Strombo interview in 2011 or 2010, that he would have been perfectly okay if Rush started with Moving Pictures, which is crazy to think about because of everything that came before it that we're going to dive into in the next couple of months.
That's just his high standard, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely.
It's so quintessential. I almost take it for granted. It's so familiar and so popular and so well worn. I've listened to it so many times that I find myself forgetting that it exists. And then I realize, oh my God, there's this album Moving Pictures. Let me listen to this one again. And every single time it's like hearing it for the first time.
Blows me immaculately produced. Everything about it is just,
I could go on for another 2 hours about the
production. Thank you so much for the opportunity to go back and revisit this. I have loved being on these deep dives, seriously. But this one in particular is like, I love this record. I really do. There's not a bad song on it.
It is fantastic. Let us know, folks, your thoughts. on moving pictures, like Donna said in the comments. Next, we will be going backwards in time to permanent waves. And as Getty says at the end of Vital Signs, I hope you evolate from the norm.
Yeah.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.